I moved from non-league at the age of 21 to Coventry. So when I went to Coventry, I set my own electrical business up. So I was trading in the afternoon, playing football in the morning. So after 2 years doing that, I moved to Nottingham Forest, as you rightly say, in '85. And I thought to myself, well, I need to keep on, because I had to take a wage cut, basically, to go from electrician to pro footballer in the top division in the country. That's how finances have changed in the world of football, you know, to take a wage cut from doing that. So I had to basically keep trading because I had to pay a mortgage. So when I went and joined Nottingham Forest, the first thing I said to Brian Clough was, do you mind if I advertise in the programme and carry on working? And he was all for it, you know. I thought it was brilliant, bought his kettle in for me to mend, and from there, you know, I carried on trading for the next 2 years. I think during the 80s there seemed to be one person at each club that had a definitive style of play, which was normally reasonably aggressive. There was Julian Dix at West Ham was the Terminator, and I was Psycho, and someone else was the Idiot. And you know, everyone seemed to have one player, but the rest of the nicknames seemed to drop away come the 90s, and mine stuck with me as such, which is, it was a bit of theatre, let's say, coming onto the pitch, and I always used to go to the home supporters and buoy them up a little bit and whatever, and it sort of generated myself, sharpened my focus and the fans. But when you're out with your wife having a quiet meal in a restaurant and someone starts singing Psycho, Psycho across the restaurant, it's not a great place to be, I can assure you. It was for me to have the opportunity to play for England was fantastic. People ask me nowadays when I was involved with the England under-21s, they say, "Oh, I wish some of the young players coming through now could have that same passion for the country." And I always point out to the fact you have to have that passion in your heart before you turn up to your first squad. You know, it's got to mean a lot before you actually turn up. Just by putting a shirt on for any nation won't all of a sudden turn you into this individual that loves your country, loves representing your country. That was always in me, I think, as a person. So to get that opportunity to actually play for my country, on top of that, probably the most proudest moment in my career was to captain in England. You know, I think in a team sport that I'm very proud to be a team member. That is one individual accolade that you stand alone with, and that was fantastic for me. And looking back over my career and what I've done, I think that'll always stand out as the one thing that I'm most proud of. I think with myself, it's not fear of failure that's ever driven me on. Adversity has always been, in a bizarre way, the one thing that has spurred me on in some ways, you know. We spoke earlier about, as a 13-year-old getting released from Queen's Park Rangers, the club you support all your life, and how that feels, and does it spur you on to carry on? Attempting to get in the army and the police and failing interviews, you know. I know further down my career, breaking my leg twice in the same season at West Ham, but still at the age of 37, but still having that mentality to want to push on. I think every time I've experienced adversity in my career, it spurred me on. And the penalty miss in 1990, whilst at the time was a massive blow to me individually, my best season as a player come the following season, when I scored 16 goals, no penalties, and as I say, from footballing terms, by far my best season. Now, I sit back and ask myself, why is that? What is the question behind that? Why is that the case? I think if you can turn around and say, whenever adversity comes knocking, there are real learning curves. You learn more about yourself, you learn more about those around you at those given times, and it's what you take from that. My experience from 1990 was probably had payback, and I had to wait some 17 years, I think, to get payback when I took charge of the under-21 squad. And I said to myself, these young players can never go through the experience I did of an ad hoc penalty selection process like in 1990, where people put their hand up at the end of a game. Bear in mind, we're in a World Cup semi-final with 500 million people watching, and you volunteer to take penalties. That can't be right. So for a period of As soon as a young under-21 player come into my care, we practice penalties after every training session. Statistically, I wanted my team to be the most prepared team for a penalty shootout there's ever been in world football, and I think I achieved that in my time. Now, that only come because I had suffered adversity 17 years later, I think it was, or 27 years, however many years earlier. That adversity spurred me on. And the same in Euro 96. People say to me, look, you missed a penalty in 1990. Whatever made you offer your services to take another penalty 6 years later on your own soil and whatever? And my answer's always the same. Failure is not putting myself forward. Once again, we went into another penalty shootout, no prior practice to it. We practiced ad hoc, but no set taking order of anything of that nature. So it was down to me to volunteer my services to a manager when we go into a penalty shootout. For me, failure is when you don't step forward. You know, whether I scored or missed that penalty that day it wouldn't have been irrelevant, but in some ways it would have been. Failure is standing on the halfway line, letting Tony Adams take a penalty, and who's never taken a penalty before in his life. So for me, that was the real learning from that. You've got to put yourself forward all the time, you know, for good and for bad. In some ways, yeah, risk-taking's a big part in leadership, but we all are different individuals in many ways, you know. I'm probably less of a risk-taker as a person than maybe the next person or whatever. But it really is a case of knowing yourself and quantifying that risk. What we try to do, it's like if someone said a similar question about risk-taking, I would turn that on its head and say, well, I've shown you an opportunity when I missed a penalty and I weren't prepared to take a risk by sending my young players into a major tournament unprepared. So what you try to do, whether it be in the sporting environment or the corporate environment, is irrelevant. You try to minimise risk. Why would you gamble when you can do your homework and leave no stone unturned? There are times where you have to go with a gut feeling. Maybe in my environment it's putting a young player in. Is he ready, is he not? You have to go with your gut feeling at times and back your judgment. Some you'll get right, some you'll get wrong. And on top of that, if you get a few wrong, you say, right, we've suffered adversity, what can I learn by it? There's always a great learning by there. So if you can put yourself in a win-win situation, whatever you do, I think you've got a chance. I think there's very little difference between the corporate and the sporting field. I really do. You're dealing with man-to-man management's absolutely vital. You're dealing with maybe the maverick that works inside the organisation that maybe doesn't sit particularly well with other colleagues who are more team orientated but can deliver a real high-flying product week in, week out and hit their sales targets, like that superstar in a football team that is a bit of a maverick, that it disassociates with one or two other teammates, but you know full well this is the fella that's going to get you a goal at the weekend, that's going to win you a game. I think everything is underpinned by man-to-man management, I really do. How you deliver with each individual, but showing the full squad of what you've got, or the workplace, that everyone is treated equal in this. You know, there is a real team environment, and the trick is to build team. I think Leicester as a football club at this moment in time are a great point in case to that. They've got individuals that have all maximised their potential, which in any work environment is fantastic. The one thing that they've done as well, there's a real team. You can tell from the outside there's a real love for each other and a real affection for each other, that they've built a team. And I think the main thing is as well, on top of that, by the time you've ended up washing all that away, they love what they do. They care about their football club, or they care about their work environment, as I did with the under-21s. You've got to care about the product you're delivering and be passionate about it. I think the big leaders that I've seen in my profession, Alex Ferguson, what has he done? He's gone straight into an organisation that had not a great culture, let's say, over expectation as well, which you have to deal with. I think he set a culture, and he said, you're going to have to get with this culture. And I think what great leaders do, and they set a culture and say, this is what we want to achieve, but you hand over somewhere on the journey, once you've started to achieve that, and the culture and the setting of a culture is more powerful coming from the factory floor or the dressing room, wherever it may be. And great leaders are prepared to do that. They're prepared to set the vision and say, this is how we're going to do it. But at some stage on that journey, they hand over. You hand over to the dressing room when you know they've got the message. And certainly with myself working with the under-21s, it was fantastic. It come to a stage where probably the players, my staff, and I could almost sit back, and whoever got interviewed or whatever conversation was had, the same messages were coming out of their mouths, dressed up slightly differently, but the power had been handed to the staff and to the dressing room. And that's where the real power is, and that's when you, in my opinion, when you really know that you've got an organisation that is a high-flying organisation, whether it be in the corporate world or the sporting world, where the leader can almost take a step back and say, look, I've put the initial outlines of a plan down, you've shown me you can run with it, I'm going to empower you now, and you deliver the product and the performance that you know you're capable of. And I think that that's an element of trust as well, where I think anyone working for a real leader knows that he's valued and trusted by that leader.